Rev up your engines!
David Brown Sr. says, my wife has a 2020 Ford Escape with a 1.5 liter. It's supposed to get 25 miles and 30 on the highway. No matter what my wife does, she gets a maximum of 18.1. What can I do? Your wife probably drives really fast, and that's just what's going to happen. You get an Escape, which is a reasonable sized SUV. It's got a tiny little 1.5 liter EcoBoost engine. Here's the thing about turbochargers. They're kind of a fraud to the public. The reason that they went to turbochargers instead of superchargers when they mass produce cars is because theoretically, on a dynamometer, they get better gas mileage than superchargers because they're using your exhaust gas instead of a supercharger that uses a belt or an electric motor to run the superchargers, which of course takes energy, so it gets worse gas mileage. But, and this is a gigantic but, you turbocharge a car, most people, they're going to drive them harder. They're going to make the engine rev higher as the turbo kicks in. That negates any gas mileage that you're going to get. So it doesn't surprise me. She's supposed to get 30 miles down the highway and she's getting a max of 18. You drive them hard, that's what's going to happen with a little engine in a relatively big-sized vehicle that weighs a lot. That is SUV. It's high up in the air. This is the hilarious thing, you know. If they test these things for gas mileage on a dyno, they're totally not taking into effect wind resistance, right? One of the big things for gas mileage is how efficient is your vehicle going through the air. So, yeah, a lot of that stuff is total fake. Now, I mean, make sure it's tuned up, it's got a clean air filter and all that stuff, and using good gas and changing the oil regularly, but you'll probably find if that's what she's getting, that's what she's going to get, because somebody who drives harder in a little engined, large car that's turbocharged is always going to get worse gas mileage, just because of the nature of the beast. Stefik says, I got $2,000 to spend on a sedan for college. What should I get? Well, you're not going to get much these days for $2,000. So look around. Now, of course, like Toyotas and Hondas are the best. Maybe you get one that's really old, but they can still last. I mean, you might find one with 140,000 miles. Some of them go 250, 350,000 miles. If it's a Corolla or an Accord or a Civic or a Camry and it's older, it's only going to go for so much money. Now, you're going to have to get older in years, too, not just mileage, because the late model ones, it's insane what people are paying. The other day I saw somebody, he bought a Honda Accord with 190,000 miles, and he paid $12,000 for that car. No way would I pay that kind of money for a car with that kind of miles, but sometimes it's going for that. So you're going to have to go for a high mileage in an older car, but if you can find a Toyota or a Honda, it's in decent shape. That's what you should go for. But on the other hand, you never know what you're going to run into. Maybe you find an estate sale, and there's a Buick from some old person who died, and it's only got 15,000 miles. If you can get it cheap enough and it's low enough mileage, even an American car can still be good for a while. Beggars can't be choosers. $2,000, you're not going to get much these days. So, I mean, spread your net wide and see what you can find. Man with Cigars says, Scotty, my '01 Ford Ranger brakes hard when it's wet, and I only push it slightly. Is that normal? Well, no. But what you want to do, it's an '01 Ranger. One, take all the wheels out, especially the front wheels. If your brake pads are worn, just replace them. But let's say they're not worn. Then you probably need new brake rotors. The brake rotors are flat. They stop your car. You step on them, it squeezes them, right, as they spin around. But as they age, they get what's called glazed. You put water on glazed rotors, and they're not going to stop right. It's a Ranger, it's, you know, smaller truck. You can go to places like AutoZone, buy those aftermarket Chinese-made rotors. They're perfectly fine. But when you do, you got to change the pads, too, because the pads will be glazed along with the rotors. Now, if you're a real cheapskate, you could take the brake pads off, put new rotors on, and then spend about half an hour with some sandpaper and really rough up those pads. And if you rough them up and they're okay and there's no pieces breaking off, you could use them over. You could deglaze the pads. You can't deglaze the rotors, but you can deglaze the pads if you want to go through that trouble. But really, you can get brake pads for like 20-something bucks at AutoZone from. I would just buy new pads, too. Tyler says, I got a rotten egg smell coming from inside my trunk. Is it dangerous? Now, let's say you go to the back of the car and it's running, and you go to the tailpipe and you smell it. That makes sense. That means there's sulfur in the gasoline you're burning. Buy different gasoline and pray it hasn't ruined the catalytic converter, because sulfur will ruin your catalytic converter. It'll destroy it, right? We had a customer when I was a teenager in Lewiston, New York, at my father's gas station. And they brought the car in at night and said, this car really smells. I said, well, we'll park it here and I'd check it out tomorrow, right? So my grandfather gets there at 6 in the morning. I got there at 9. And he said, what did you do last night? What did you do? Go to the bathroom in the back or something? He says, it stinks in here. I said, well, the woman said this car stinks. We put it up in the air. We look, we can't see anything. We opened the trunk. a million flies came out. It turns out that it was a little old lady. She'd gone to the grocery store and bought some frozen shrimp. This was July. And she had forgotten about it. We opened the trunk. Well, that frozen shrimp was now maggots. Flies can get into places, even a closed trunk. There's ways they can usually get in. And that shrimp, did it stink? The rancid smell of everything rotting away. So maybe open your trunk and look inside. But if it's on the outside, you got bad gas, it's burning sulfur. The only other thing it can be is your battery, which can sulfate and you'll smell. But then you open the hood and you smell the battery. If it's sulfating out your battery shot, go get another battery before it just craps out. And the thing about batteries is you want to change them sooner than later when they go bad. Because if you leave a bad battery in, it can destroy your alternator, it can ruin your ignition system from voltage surge. It can destroy all kinds. When you know your battery's going out, bite the bullet and replace it. They last for years. Don't be a real cheapskate. I'm going to keep that battery in until the car just doesn't finally start. Then I'll replace it. No. In the olden days, that was fine when you had carbureted cars. But computer cars, no. You want to change them sooner than later when you know they're bad. Day-to-Day Living says, can you recommend a scan tool for a 2007 Lexus? All right. It depends how far you want to go. Now, let's say you want to do some reasonable stuff and learn a lot. Get an Innova scanner, I-N-N-O-V-A. I got one that's like a $240 one, and it does an awful lot of information. An awful lot of information. Now, if you really want to go hog wild, X-Tool, which is a Chinese company, they make a $600 one, a D7, D8, one of those. And it actually does quite a bit. If you want to spend that kind of money, you can get quite a bit of information for that. And I mean my bee's knees one, the Think tool that I use, but that's a $5,500, $6,500 scan tool. You're not going to want to buy one like that. Look at the Innova and look at the X-Tool ones. If you don't want to spend 600 something bucks, you can do the X-Tool. It does quite a bit. But for 200 something bucks, the Innovas do quite a bit. You might want to check one of those out. Scotty, 3 months ago, I got a Ford Mondeo TDCI with 200,000 kilometers, manual tranny. Every time I release the clutch, I hear something like it's colliding. Okay, well, that's not good news. Unfortunately, all the clutch parts of your vehicle inside the transmission, you're going to need a clutch job. Either your throwout bearing's going out or the pressure plate springs are wearing out. But regardless of what it is, you're going to need a new clutch. Now, when I tell people to put clutches in a car, I'll tell you something. You really and truly want to buy a clutch kit. Don't go half-heartedly and say, oh, well, the throwout bearing's going to change. You're going to pay a ton of money, usually today, well over $1,000 labor, to pull that tranny off, replace the whole thing with a kit, all new parts, and it's going to last you a long time. It only makes sense. It says, Scotty, my car came with the smallest battery at the factory, but it also supports a higher amp battery. Good idea to replace it? Sure, why not? You know, you want more power. Look, they're all 12-volt systems. So you're going to be buying a 12-volt battery. Higher amperage is just more power. The reason they put smaller batteries in is because it's cheaper to make them that way. Some of those Hondas, man, they got these tiny little batteries in them. Some of them, 2.5 years, they wear out because they're too tiny. Problem with some of the Hondas, though, there's no room to put a bigger battery in because they put it in a tiny little space. But no, it doesn't hurt anything at all, other than your pocketbook. It's going to cost more. But it's better to have a bigger battery than a really small one. That's just how it goes. Joe says, Scotty, how do you convert HID headlights in a Lexus GS 430 2003 to conventional halogen system? I would not advise doing that. What I'd advise is convert it to LEDs, because LEDs don't use much power at all. And they make LED bulbs that fit all kinds of things. Don't buy the junky Chinese ones that cost, $19.95. Get like a $100 pair. I've got them in my Matrix, my wife's Lexus, and these LED conversion ones are quite simple. They come with everything, and all you got to do is plug them in. You would unplug the main power. You would bypass all your HID stuff and just go to the regular lighting system that goes to power, the 12-volt system. Cut all those wires and wire it with the 12-volt in the ground. LEDs are real simple to hook up. That's what I'd go. I wouldn't go to halogen back in those. You need stronger wires. They use more power. The LEDs are more efficient, too. And they won't melt your expensive plastic headlamps like halogens will. It's the thing about LEDs. They run a lot cooler, so they're not going to melt all that plastic stuff. Jamie L. says, 02 Chevy Blazer ZR2, are wheel spacers dangerous? Well, they really are when you think about it. You got a vehicle that's made, right? And you're putting spacers on your axle and then bolting a wheel on it. It's just one more thing that can go wrong. Now, there are companies that make good ones if you torque them on correctly and put them on. But my advice, if you are going to use spacers, I'm not a fan of it because then you're changing the geometry of the vehicle and all that. But if you are, make sure you get the correct torque specifications and do one thing. Before you torque them down, put Loctite, the strongest Loctite you get on the threads. So then when you torque them down, the Loctite will hold them in place. It'll still come off. It's not like they're glued on, they won't come off. They'll still come off. I would do that. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.